Hello, everyone. Hello. It's nice to see you guys here in this kind of intimate conversation. And I want to welcome you to make this as participatory as you wish. Like, please feel free to join us with camera if you want, or at any point to ask a question or drop a question or a comment into the chat. The intimacy of this Zoom meeting could allow us to have a different kind of conversation. So I want to welcome that if you feel inspired. We're going to start today by sharing the book. So I'm going to read to you. I have this overhead camera, which will allow me to read the book. I don't imagine that we have kids today, that I think that we envision this as a conversation. If that's not the case, then definitely let me know. But I think you guys are probably here to hear about the process of the book. And but first, let's share it. So I'm gonna pop right over here to the other grid and read this for you. Okay, so here we have the beautiful cover by Catia, The Bear and the Moon. And I love this first page turn. I love the end papers. This is something that I really enjoy about picture books. And some picture books just have uniform color, but Katia has created this incredible, beautiful detail. And here we go. Let's dive in. The Bear and the Moon. Opening his eyes after a long snooze, the bear saw a red dot in the blue sky. The closer it floated, the bigger and rounder and redder the dot became, until it was no longer a dot at all. It was red as a berry and round like the moon, with a long silver string drifting brightly in the breeze. Curious, the bear went to investigate.
Wait, Matthew, hold on for just a second.
Yeah?
Ben, is it possible to zoom in on that one screen? Because I wonder if it's very small for everybody.
I pinned it.
Oh, okay. Is everyone seeing it okay and big? Okay, good. Just.
Oh, I clicked on the screen. Oh, good. So Emmy, that's exactly what you should do, is click on it. Great.
Okay, everyone should be able to click on the screen so it's bigger and it's not just a grid. Okay.
Yeah, if you go into speaker view, that might work. I think pinning is the trick, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I just wanted to
No
make sure.
problem.
Yeah.
Curious, the bear went to investigate. First, he tried to catch the string between his teeth, but when it floated out of reach, he climbed onto a boulder and stood on his two hind legs, balancing. Uh-oh. The bear wobbled, slipped, and tumbled into a furry puddle. Poor bear. But then it drifted nearer and nearer. There. Suddenly, the bear felt lighter than air. When he walked, it walked. When he danced, it danced. And when dinner time arrived, he tied the silver string to a stone. The bear enjoyed the quiet company while he ate beside the creek. And when evening became night, it glowed softly in the moonlight. The next morning, the bear gave it a tour of his whereabouts. Here's the tree I can climb to find honey. Here is where I curl into a ball and roll down the hill. And this is the spot where I sit on the pot. All the while, the floating red thing smiled back at him like a friend. It dipped and breezed and bumped against the bear's cheek. What a nice thing. What a wonderful thing. What a squishable, huggable thing. Uh-oh. The bear stared at the red tatter dangling on the silver string. He thought, maybe I can fix it. He tried stretching it. He tried throwing it back up into the sky. He tried closing his eyes and dancing with the string in his hand, just as they had danced before. But nothing brought it back. The sky had sent him a gift, a friend, a small red moon, and now it was gone. Bad bear, he thought. Bad, bad bear. Night fell, but the bear skipped his dinner. With a heavy heart, he listened to the water rush over the rocks in the creek and gazed up at the stars. When suddenly, the full moon rose from behind two mountains. It reached down to him and gently stroked his fur. Quietly, the moon was speaking to the bear, and the bear understood. Good bear, kind bear, don't worry, bear. Blanketed in moonlight, the bear remembered the small dot that grew and grew and grew into a red round friend drifting brightly in the breeze. It was gone now, but as he dozed off to sleep, he held the memory on a silver string. And in his dreams, they danced again. All right. And actually, let me just finish off by showing you the other gorgeous end papers. And then behind the jacket, you have this case.
Oh, nice. Beautiful.
And maybe, Catia, should I show the back as well?
Yeah.
I don't want to skip anything because every detail is so considered and so thought out and so intentional. Such a beautiful thing that Catia has done. And that is my transition, because next we'd like to, thank you, Emmy. I know, Vanessa, this is like really Katia's turn to talk about the project of creating the world, because with the collaboration between author and illustrator, in this case, not in every case, but in this case, I wrote the story and then had Catia in mind and shared the manuscript with Catia. And then it was this process of Catia creating the world of the book. And so for the next part of the presentation, Catia is going to share some of her process and envisioning and creating this bear in this world.
Oh, great. Thank you, Matthew. That was such a good read. It's exactly what Matthew said. I'm going to just share my screen right now so we can jump right into it. But, as you know, for you artists out there because I see some of you are also picture book artists and writers too. It all starts with the story. It all starts with the manuscript. And I completely fell in love with this manuscript when I read it. And one of the biggest things that I loved about it was this, like I was saying before, like just, I spoke with Matthew about it and many times, but it's a manuscript that not only really exudes a really, like a simple truth of the idea behind it of self-forgiveness, and even just the message of it is it's really powerful. But not only that, as an artist, one of the things that I was really excited to do was to figure out what the moon would, what it would look like for the moon to speak, right? And so it all starts with, for me, it all starts with me not knowing what it would look like, but really, but honing in on what the emotional tone of the story is. So it all starts with, for me, it starts with emotions. And I start every project the same way, which is that I start by gathering inspiration wherever I can find it. So it could be gathering information like pictures and even just little snippets of words that come up, and just anything that I can find, really. And when it was possible, I would go to, I mean, obviously now it's not possible to go out very much, but one of the things that I would do when I would be in the sort of bathing in the world of creating a book, I would visit bookstores or libraries, and I kind of would randomly walk down the aisles looking for anything that grabbed my eye, and I would take pictures and put it all together into like an inspiration board for myself. And for the bear and the moon, I started to gather a lot of inspiration from Russian animation, from mid-century artists, to things that were really well designed in my eye. I really wanted really, really strong silhouettes as well. And I thought a lot about the character of the bear. And I knew that in order for the character of the bear to be believable, I needed to understand what the behavior, what the body language of a bear in the natural world looked like. And so I studied their behavior quite a bit. And I looked at a lot of videos of that, and one of which is this one in particular that really caught my eye. And you see here is a bear cub in its natural habitat, and they really like hiding things in little like nooks and crannies, and they also like to collect pine twigs. And
some more inside.
And you don't want to get too close because they have sharp teeth, but as long as you give them enough wood chips, I think it keeps them happy and at bay. But but this little bear is actually my son. And when I was working on this book, my son had just recently been born, and so he became a huge inspiration for this, the creation of the bear cub. And the other bear cub that was a huge inspiration for me was this bear cub. And his name is Smudge, and he apparently is a huge online sensation, unbeknownst to me prior to researching about bear cubs. But he just really grabbed my heart. Like when I came upon his photo, I knew right away that he would be the muse for the bear character. And I sent it to Matthew. Right away, I said, I think this is going to be our bear. I think this is it. And you can just see he's just such an odd kind of looking bear. And then I found out that he's actually a moon bear of all kinds of bears, which is interesting that it kind of fit perfectly with our story. But so after I found Smudge, then I started to do a bunch of character study sketches. And you can see here that I keep them really loose, and they're, some of these drawings are just not anything I would show anyone. But since we're we're kind of just talking about process, I thought it'd be really helpful to show that these are really not final sketches. They're just really rough, and I'm really just trying to find the emotion of, and of the character, and then create a really simple and clear silhouette related to that. And here you can see that it's based on, so I took those, did you have a question, Ben? Sorry, no? Okay, I thought you said something. But yeah, the photo, so I looked at a lot of photo reference, and occasionally got really lucky where a photo reference would be the perfect, the bear would be in a perfect position for me to use and to apply straight to an image in the book. So this happened to be one where I studied it and then I applied it straight to this, this image right here. And so now, after talking about, after I create the world or the character sketches, then I go into creating the storyboards. And at this point, I am just, you know, I'm really just looking at the manuscript. And prior to even doing this part, I have already taken the manuscript and I've already outlined where all the page turns are going to be. And I've already outlined where, you know, some of the essential elements of what I want the storyboard to show. And you can see here that the storyboards are quite finished looking. And that's because this is like the third or fourth pass of the storyboard. But initially the storyboard looks quite messy and it's actually hard to decipher. But I wanted to show you guys something that's a little bit more finished. And, you know, I'm really, yeah, go ahead.
All right. When you got the manuscript, was it already broken up into different pages, or was it just sort of all just written out without any distinct like page turns?
Yeah, no page turns, no art notes, I don't think. Matthew, were there art notes? I don't think there were.
But
oh,
like,
you're good.
but the manuscript is just, it's just all written out. Like there's no indication of pages on the manuscript, correct?
So sorry about that. So what I often will do is put in asterisks where I think a page turn might be, but it could also indicate like the gutter. So sometimes I gently put an asterisk in there, but I've learned through collaborations that it's better not to divide it up too strongly, because then you don't give the illustrator the opportunity to imagine the pagination of the book and where the page turn should come.
Right.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious about when you wrote it, if you like indicated any pages, but sounds
I do the, like, sometimes I'll think about 32 pages and I'll divide it out so that I can imagine how it might be, but then I'm learning that I should remove those things before giving it to the illustrator so that they can reimagine it.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting process because, you know, I think it's not just about, it's really about, you're really creating as an artist, you're not just creating the sort of, what do you call it? You're not creating just the, you're not just creating like a world that specifically reflects what the words say only. You're really actually creating a whole narrative, like storyline of its own. And you can sometimes, and to have the freedom to do that means that you need to be able to be able to maneuver around the text, the manuscript, right? Because if the text already has the page turns in place, and it would constrict what you can possibly do with the narrative storytelling side of things, like the visual storytelling side of things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was an interesting kind of process to break up the manuscript and create the page turns, because none of it has to do with like how much text you want per page. I mean, it's really where the page turn and where like an action can kind of be extended into a tension point, you know? So I'm not thinking about like, well, there's too much text on this page, so I want to put in the next page. Or, you know, I mean, it's really about like, for me, at least for this one book, I was really thinking about like, what are the emotional tension points? And then I pinned those, right? Like the emotional tension point between this and this is that he's really sad, and then all of a sudden he's not, because something happened, something flipped, right? And so I really wanted to, and so there's a lot of information crammed into one spread that felt like a lot to do, I still felt like it was necessary to do that in order to then take a breath and really rest in the moment when they connect. And that happened visually. So I think had Matthew already pinned it here and there, it would have made sense in the manuscript, but it wouldn't have made sense visually. And then same thing here, right? Like isolating the uh-oh into its own thing altogether. That's just one line, right? That's just one word. And, it's hard to anticipate that as a writer, I don't think, and for an artist, I mean, for me, it's so much of what I need to have the freedom to do in order to craft on my end something more additive instead of just something that is just supporting the words, but not creating anything else on top of that. So I really need that freedom. And that's one of the reasons why when Matthew was talking about handing over a manuscript to an artist and leaving out most of the art notes, unless there's something really specific that needs to be translated, why that's so important is because, like for me, like when I'm in the process of creating, I'm really like a sponge. Like I really take on a lot of information, and I don't want to be influenced by the pressure to adapt to someone else's like vision, even if it is something that they're not really fixed on and it's just a suggestion. It can still affect I feel like it can still affect my subconscious in a way that may lead me into a different direction. And I kind of just, so I'm really protective of that space. And I really appreciate, collaborators who understand and who are protective of that too. It takes a lot of trust, but that's kind of part of what creates a really good collaboration. So yeah, I just want to, just point out that in this part of the process where we're working with storyboards, I like using really small thumbnails for my storyboards because, and again, these are way more finished than I normally have it. They almost look like a final sketch because they kind of are. But, if you saw some of my earlier sketches, which unfortunately I couldn't dig up, they're so rough, and what they're actually indicating, the only thing they're really indicating on the page is eye movement, right? Like, and so I wanted to just point out that some of the things that get resolved at the stage and some of the things that I think about are, I'm thinking about, and you notice that everything's black and white because, and this is kind of how I work anyway, like there's like a hierarchy of, I feel like there's a hierarchy of narrative needs in a picture book, right? Like I feel like there's like character clarification. So spending time developing the character is of utmost importance. That's why it's its own part of the process, separate part of the process. And I do that first. I figure out who the character is. I figure out exactly what I want them to look like. I get to know them really well before even diving into the world that they live in. And so after I find out I created the bear based on smudge, then I go on to creating the world of the bear. And at this point, I'm not worried about color necessarily because it's like a cherry on top, before worrying about color. And I think about values, I think about composition, I think about eye movement, and I think about text. And text goes with composition, right? Because there are spreads where there's a lot of text, and you have to think about where it is going to go in relation with the actual drawing, because it is part of the composition. So this phase, this part of the process is a lot, and it takes weeks and weeks of going back and forth to try to figure all those different parts. Does the character look the same per page? Can you see distinct page turns? Does it keep the momentum going? Is it clear? Is the composition balanced? Is the emotional journey of the bear clear through the character design? So all that I'm thinking about as I work through the storyboards.
Catia, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I've noticed, so Tina was chiming in about eye movement and how important it is.
Yeah.
And that's new to me. Can you just speak really quickly about eye movement, or I don't want to derail you, but I'm just fascinated by eye movement.
Oh no, I love the chiming in. Please, that's great. That's such a good question. Yeah, the eye movement, it literally is, it basically keeps the momentum going this way. So you can see how, you know, here he's looking up at the balloon, and then you kind of see how instead of, because I could have easily had the balloon here, you know, but I have it here because it leads to the next page. And then here, it leads to the next page. And again, it leads to the next page. So you're constantly, gently, whenever you can, leading the reader to the next page.
Mm.
Yeah, and so it's just part of a gentle kind of flow of where the eye goes. You know, and you can use a lot of different tools to do that. You can use, you know, value, where maybe the highest contrasting element is towards the right of the page, or maybe you can use text. You know, it could be like the thing of highest contrast on one side. Maybe it can be a movement, like with the balloon, like moving in that direction. So it's just keeping that in mind can be one. And, you know, again, like I don't think it's something that you have to make sure you have in every spread, but it is a tool to use that can, you know, help with that.
Amazing.
I have a technical question.
Yeah.
For your thumbnails, are you doing them all on pencil and paper first, or are you just going like straight to digital? Like for you to get to this stage where you've got it laid out like this,
Yeah.
are you working straight digital first?
I'm not. It's a combination of things, and it might be easier to see when I, you know, this close up here of a storyboard. I use a variety of different things. You know, a lot of times, like I'll sketch it out on a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with charcoal and pencil, and then I'll scan it into Photoshop, and then I'll lay it out into the storyboard grid like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll put the type on the bottom, or text on the bottom. And then I will sometimes add color, like just a spot of color in Photoshop as well. So it's a little bit of both, like to digital, basically, combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see this like more finished version of that. I did a couple more penciling, like more charcoal stuff, and then I did, you know, this is Photoshop, and I cut out a couple things in Photoshop to like change the size a little bit too. So yeah.
Cool.
And that's the final, from that to that to that.
Mm.
And you know, and then, you know, just talk about a little bit about the tools that I used for the book. It was a pretty interesting process because I'm a true believer that it's not about the tool necessarily. It's really about you know, experimenting and finding I think surprises that what am I trying to say? Well, like, just suffices to say, it's just that what I'm trying to say is that I don't have one tool that I use every single time, and I don't think tools are as important as people may think they are, even though it is a question that gets asked a lot. I just think that it's more important to just, you know, play with different mediums and kind of find your way through. And if you have a favorite tool and that you like using, that's fine too. But I kind of, for me, like thinking about the bear and the moon, I really wanted there to be a feeling of like a feeling of like play, and like I wanted things to feel rough. I wanted things to have a lot of texture. And also I was dealing, you know, I was a new parent, and so I was thinking about tools that will facilitate work and portable, you know, where I could be portable and I could take it anywhere, and I could, you know, easily just whip it out and finalizing a piece instead of using paint. Because in the past, using paint was just a big to-do, having to work the palette and save the paint and wash the brushes. And so I thought, you know, let me just try something else. so I use I use a lot of different tools to create the bear. And it was just pastels, markers, paint, and yeah,
Paper.
and go ahead.
And paper too, right? You said like
Oh
torn.
yeah, that's right, and collage.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, so it starts with a black and white sketch like this made with charcoal, and then I take into Photoshop. So this is the part where I do color studies. So I take each charcoal drawing and I put it into Photoshop, and I do like a little color script of the entire book to kind of get a sense of what the emotional journey looks like through color. And then I start on the final. And for the bear in particular, like I said, I used a lot of different tools. So I used, ink, I used paint, I used charcoal, I used pastel, and oops. And you can see here the marks of the brush and the pencils and everything. And then I added some collage.
A lot of texture. Really, really nice. We have a question. It says, do you always use the tools like for the town of the turtle and sea serpent? They are distinctly yours, but different media. What's your favorite?
What was the question again? Can you ask?
One sec. Hold on, maybe I'll just. Vanessa?
Hey, Vanessa.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Oh my goodness. Hi.
I
What a
finally get
treat.
to see you and Matthew in person.
Yes, it's good to see you in person.
Yay,
Good to
Vanessa.
see you both.
I figured it's easier for you to just ask the question
Sure.
than the way I was dictating it.
What a treat, Vanessa. You
Oh,
are
it is a treat.
inspiration.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you, Ben, for having this. Thank you so much. It's just, I'm so excited. So my question is, I collect your books, both of you. I collect your books. And I'm just interested in knowing, do you use the same tools all the time, or does it, is it kind of dictated to you by how you feel, emotionally about the book, that you change it?
Oh yeah, I think it's exactly that. Is that the book kind of speaks to me. I know it's a little bit. I think you probably understand, because I feel like you're that kind of creative too. You just sort of, I think that reading a manuscript, I just get a sense of what it needs, right? And then from there, I find the right tool to use. It's not the way around. I don't try to fit into that one box.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love it.
Thank you for that
Thank
question. So here I'm just going to break down again like what I do, which is, this is actually pretty much the same for every book. I do a sketch, color study, and final painting. And although I do switch up the tools that I use for every single book, there are certain things that I think are like go-tos, like the value study is something that doesn't change. I think it's so crucial to creating like a really effective image that's emotional, like really thinking about the values. So when I think about the two essential tools that I always use when painting or when creating is, one is squinting, right? Because that's how you create values, right? You think you squint and you kind of, and that's how you, figure, where the lightest part is. Like if you squint, you can kind of see where your eye goes to first. And that should always be the main part of the story, the main part of the image. Like you should always have the value supporting the main part of that storyline in that page. That makes sense. And then the second thing is this beautiful art masking fluid that I love, that I use for almost all of my books, which is, you can use it for a lot of different mediums, not just for watercolor. I use it for pastels too. So, if for those of you who are not familiar with using a mask, a liquid mask, basically how it works is you you mask out an area, and it's like latex, like liquid latex. And once it dries, you can paint on top and then peel off the latex, and it protects the board from getting any of that, the color or the paint. So it's a way to get really messy while keeping control of the image. And I just, when I found that, it really changed my world. So I wanted to just make sure to give it a shout out here. Right, so that's all the interiors of the book there. And then, so now that I'm done, now that I've finished the interiors of the book, then I go on to working on the cover. And that's kind of the process for me, is that I have to get to know a story and get to know the interiors of a book before I can do the cover. So the cover is often the last thing I have to do. I wanted to show this image because one of the first ideas that I had for a cover for the bear was to do like a cutout. And, I still am really excited about that idea, even though it really wasn't pragmatic, but just thought I would show you. And then here's some sketches of cover ideas that I had. And this is one of them.
Sorry, Kat, can you go back to that one cover ideas page?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. What now? You said it wasn't pragmatic. Was it because like the editors were just like, oh, we don't have the budget for a die cut cover, or was it some other reason?
Yeah, they were saying that they didn't have the budget, but they said it in a way that I understood, because there was concern about the budget that then would eat into maybe a paper budget.
Right.
And other things. And for this particular book, we had special colors, lined up. So there was Pantone spot coloring for the bear, for the balloon. And then also there was what is it called? A special color that was added to the CMYK. So it was, instead of magenta, it was rhodamine. So it was a different kind of red that was added in order to create a deeper purple, because the CMYK wasn't allowing for that deep kind of saturated blue that really comes into play when you get to the part with the moon and the northern lights. And I really pushed for that. It was like a real back and forth negotiation that took a while to try to get down, because when I got the proofs and the CMYK came in, I texted Matthew. I said, Matthew, it's not working. That CMYK is just not working, and I really need it to. I need those colors to show. And so that's all to say that it's a push and pull. And if you get certain things, you may not get some other things, and so you kind of have to figure out what is the most essential of what you're needing for a book to work. And the die cut is nice for me, but I don't think it really would have been worth it for me to have a paper that's not what I wanted, and in that color. So
so you got two extra colors beyond the CMYK.
No, the IPA, which is not IPA, it was like, what is it called? Well, there's a rhodamine color that was that replaced the magenta.
Oh, I see.
The magenta, it was a different kind of color, which is, it was kind of a gamble, to be honest, they said, but it all turned out. Which is a big thank you to the production team, because they were like they really did such a beautiful job. They really came through on that. Yeah.
Cool.
So these are some of the sketches that got canned, but I wanted to show you all some. And you can tell, I'm sure you can, one of the things that happens when you're doing these sketches is that you never know, there may be other opportunities for you to use some of the images. Like this one in particular became the case. So it's kind of nice to be able to reuse some images. And this is the very first sketch of the cover that I did. And we went on to, when that got approved, then I worked on the color for the background. And then when that got approved, then I worked on the type treatment. And the type treatment was just really hard, but we went through, you know, so many rounds of sketches for that, and ultimately came to this. So that's the final cover, all done. And then I had the case done, and then I created the end papers after that. And you know, the way I think about a book is that the entire thing should tell the story, not just the first, not just the when the story starts, but from cover to cover, you have an opportunity to really tell the story. And so the end papers, you know, also hints at what the story is about, which is, you know, you have the balloon, and then and then the last page, you have the moon instead of the balloon.
Nice. We have a question. Can you go back to that page with the title treatments?
The type treatments?
Type treatments, yeah. These were all like hand drawn, correct?
Yeah.
And what made, I guess, like, can you run us through some of the iterations that didn't work and why they didn't work?
Sorry, can you say that again? I couldn't.
Can you let us know, like, some of the ones that didn't work and why they didn't choose those?
Oh my goodness, if I could. I mean,
it's okay if you can't. It's not a problem.
It's such a good question. It really is, because a huge part of working on a picture book is communicating with the editor and the designer and the art director, right? And having that communication be as clear as you can, right? Because it saves heartache on either end. So I'm always working on listening skills and also communication skills. That's part of your, you know, the job of anyone participating in a collaborative process. And I wish I could tell you that I knew, right, what was being asked. I knew what I had a vision for. The other thing I should say, on top of communication and listening skills, I think part of the skill of a artist is persuasion too. You know, you need to kind of make a good case. I think that's the reason why you can see that even in my sketches, they look like final, like they look as clean as I can get it to look, in order for there to not be any guesses and any kind of like thing lost in the translation. So that if they're rejecting something, it's because I took it to the final, you know, iteration of that thing, and not because they're not able to complete that sentence for themselves. Of course, you want a collaborator that is able to do that, but I found that, you know, that's not possible sometimes. And in this situation with the type treatment, it honestly was just, I'll be honest. I'm going to be honest, since we're among friends here, that I think it became very clear as we tackled the cover that there were two factions, right? Like, one faction was creating one type of book, and I was creating a different book. And when I realized that, and I thought, oh my gosh, they are actually wanting to create a totally different book than what I want to create, because they came back with a designed type choice that was so in like left field for me. I honestly was like, whoa, that looks like a book for like sleepy time, like some sort. It had a totally different feel and look, and there was a part of me that thought, oh my gosh, how do I bring us together, because we're creating different books here, and we need to be creating the same book. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I don't know what it is that they were looking for necessarily in the beginning.
So are these 6 images as a reaction to what they requested, or like did they pick the one from these 6 and then you kind of went down that road, or did you try some before this that led to this?
So Yeah, so what happened was I created one. So the number 3 here, this is the first one I created. Not great. I understand, not really great. And from that, they came back with their own type, right? And then I was just like, oh my gosh, I'll be honest, I was just not happy. I was like, no. And then I created like 8, right? But the thing about this is interesting is that lettering is not necessarily part of the scope of what they ask from an artist. It is a nice to have the freedom to do it and to suggest, but it's not necessarily, something that they're going to assume that you're going to have a heavy hand in, unless you really exert that preference and have an opinion. And so I knew that in order to be part of the conversation, I really needed to hit pretty hard with a lot of choices, like a lot, and be more than willing to do as much as I could to make the case for something different. And I made like, I think a total of like 20 different ones. And without much guidance at first, because mostly I felt like I was just being annoying, if anything, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking for myself, but it kind of felt like I was just going like, hey, what do you guys think? What about this? Do you like this one? Can you tell me more? So I think it's worth it, honestly. As an artist, I feel like if it is, it's such a big part of the feeling of a book. And if you feel strongly about something, I think everybody wants the best, most cohesive book. And I think you know your book better than anybody, with the writer, of course. And I think, it's part of the unsaid job description to kind of be someone who's willing to advocate for yourself, even if it's not part of your job description to do that, to do the lettering, to actually, if you feel strongly about it, make a strong case for it, and I'm really glad that I did, because looking back at the initial, suggestion, and Matthew was a huge part of this. Like, he was behind the scenes. I was texting him going like, Matthew, what do you think about this? And oh my gosh, just send me that. And, I don't want to bring you into this mess, but.
No, and when you did, it was funny because when you would show me a variety and you would say, pick which one you like the best. And I would always pick the one that you like the best, which was so interesting. Like, every time you were like, pick which one. And I was like, this one. And you're like, that's the one. So we were really aligned. And I want to just ask a question. So Vanessa was asking about what kind of paper you work on. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't skip over that.
Yeah, great question. I always so far I've used the same thing every time because it's kind of indestructible. I just use illustration board, actually, like a crescent, 100 crescent illustration board that is cold press. So it has some teeth, to like grab onto, so pastels can grab to it, and paint grabs onto it really well. I like kind of just being able to toss my paintings around the room and not worry about them. And paper feels too delicate for that. So that's really the only reason why. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of my talk here. I'm gonna just stop sharing.
All the finished, that last image was all the finished painted art?
Yeah.
Nice. Love to see those originals.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're awesome in person. Cool. Well, thank you very much for that. As far as, let's see, Matthew, now I'd love to hear a little bit about your writing process, like how I'm sure you've already talked about it before, but like, kind of what was some of the challenges in coming up with the the tone and the flow of the story? Did you have any limitations in terms of like word count or anything like that?
This story, so stories arrive in a lot of different ways. And sometimes you can kind of build them out of a hunch or an intuition or an image or a character. But for me, the Bear in the Moon, the text for the Bear in the Moon kind of arrived pretty suddenly. So the first draft was about getting it down. It was very exciting. I remember writing in the car, being a passenger in the car, and writing and writing and writing. And so it was it doesn't happen very often. So this is like my favorite way of receiving a story, when it just kind of arrives and feels like it writes itself. And I know that that's not a great answer to a process question because it makes it sound easy, but what I would say is that it's not easy at all. And it's just, you have to wait for that kind of story. So this is that kind of story that it like arrived. But then I spent a couple months polishing it and stretching it out and finding the pace and the rhythm. And then because I sort of considered this book like a poem, a narrative poem, I approached writing it in that way. So the shape of the stanzas is sort of how it appeared on the page. So a lot of that was retained in the book. And so I wrote it in California. I was home for the holidays, and this is December of 2016. And I was just going back and thinking about where I was, the mindset of that. That was after the last election. I was visiting my family. There was a lot going on in my family, a lot of illness. So I think that a story that arrives like this, even though it doesn't take a long time to write, it takes a long time for it to arrive. You know what I mean? Like whatever the emotional content of the story is, comes from some deep place. And so by the time it comes up, it feels like a gift, but you know that it had to be there for a long time for it to cohere. It's just that I wasn't doing it consciously. And then I had an artist residency in Brazil called Sacatar Institute, and it's on an island outside of Salvador. So I got to go be there for 6 weeks, and it was an incredibly beautiful place, and it was very isolated. And I had a studio that overlooked the ocean, and I'd never seen the moon so much in my life. I mean, living in New York, you kind of see it once it is already high in the sky, but in this place where I got to live with the story and develop it, I was watching the moon rise every day, and it was incredible. It was like the moon became this other entity. It's like you develop a relationship, you're like, there it goes, and you watch it like rise in the sky. So I had this very wonderful experience of being able to live with it. And then the other artists who were on the residency, I got to read it to them like a bedtime story. There were 2 friends of mine who came to my studio, and I was like, hey, I'm going to read to you, grown people. And so I got to test it out and listen to it and listen to the cadence and the rhythm, and also see the effect that it had. And I think that's when I was really excited, is that I read it to 2 grown people, and they were like, felt it so deeply. They were so emotionally moved by it that I thought, oh, there's something here. There's a little magic in this one.
Yeah.
And so I did number the pages and figure out how it might fit into a 32-page picture book. And that's where like a lot of language shook out, you know, and you find out like what needs to be there. And that's just a really wonderful process. That's like such pleasure. Once you have it and you know it's there, then it's about refining. So I imagine what for you guys as visual artists, I think a lot of you guys here are visual artists. I don't know what the analogy would be, but like after the original inspiration, being able to inhabit and polish and refine was so much fun.
Thank you. I have a question from Emmy. It says, did you have Catia in mind when you were writing, or was the pairing on behalf of the team at Chronicle?
Oh, that's such a great question. So at some point along the line, I fell in love with Catia's work, and I sold the manuscript without having shown it to Catia. So the manuscript was acquired, and then I was like, I really want Catia to do this, because this is a story of, so much of the story involves moonlight and nighttime, and not everyone can do that. And I was looking at Katia's other books, and I was like, wait, she's a poet of light. Catia is like a visual poet of light. And it was really fascinating to hear you talk about values, because that has something to do with it. But the atmosphere and the mood. And so I went to the publisher and I made a case, and I wrote a couple emails that were pretty elaborate, making a case for why I thought Catia would be the perfect illustrator. And then sort of slightly secretly, I emailed it to Catia, kind of befriending Catia and emailing it to her. And we started having a correspondence. So we're a small group here. I actually had the yes. I had a yes before we officially went through the channels. So I had the yes, I would do this, and then there it is.
No, that's great. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, usually, I guess what usually happens is you submit the manuscript, and do they give you a list of artists or is it just chosen by the editors and art directors?
I've been really fortunate that the editors that I've worked with have been so generous about the conversation, like bringing people forward and talking about these artists as a fit, and so that's been, I know that not everyone's had that experience, but so far I feel like I've been really lucky to be involved and to make a case, because I love that part of it too. It makes such a difference, I think, to share that vision, to feel aligned.
Yeah. So it sounds like when you guys were when Catia was illustrating the book, Catia, you can chime in. Was there a lot of dialogue between the both of you then? Because I know some I've heard that some writer illustrators barely talk. They mostly go through the editor or the art director.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in our case, we were definitely friendly, and trusting of each other. And like I said, even when I got just a picture of Smudge, I shared it with Matthew. And I think it was just a casual banter back and forth. It wasn't really looking for any real engagement of, hey, Matthew, can you tell me if you like the character sketch? Can you, there wasn't that kind of thing going on. And I think that's depends on the artist, and how closely they want to work with their collaborator. But for me, I think it was, I sometimes don't even have much to say and share until I know kind of deeper in the process whether it's working or not. So it's such a delicate process that sometimes I tend to be a little bit more protective of it, and because I'm really curious about what would come out, if I'm not afraid. And I think that the feeling that I have to have something validated by someone can really crush that feeling of letting things just kind of bubble up to the surface on its own. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but and Matthew, I was so respectful. There wasn't any point where he emailed me and said, can you change this? It's not what I thought, or, because it could have. I mean, we definitely were in correspondence, but he just was so trusting. And I knew that, in corresponding with him was really just, he was so supportive of things that were coming up. And then anything that was specific, editorial notes, that went through the editor. And I think that's okay. We had storyboards that were passed to the editor and then shown to Matthew as well. And then, and we kind of went through a couple of things and communicated, and he and I would communicate as well about those things, but that was after I finished everything in the book. So after the look of it, everything was done, then we talked about, yeah, like that page that you're talking about, that you opened up to, Matthew, there. Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder for like Emmy and Vanessa and Melissa, like how interesting this is, and Chris, I don't know, but like this is an example of a page where the text was up here and kind of overlapping with the moon. And so the text had this kind of primary position. And Catia rightly pointed out that like you don't want to interfere with this moon radiance. So the text was moved over here. And so like those kinds of questions were interesting for us as the makers of the book to think about. You know, initially I thought maybe the text down here kind of minimizes the text or places it off to the side, but of course it was the right call. And then a similar like question was about the final page. And initially, and in his dreams they danced again was on this page, on this final page, which made a kind of sense because I wanted a pause from this page to, and in his dreams they danced again. But Catia again pointed out that having text on this page, which is about kind of levitation, this feeling of lightness, kind of anchors the image and interferes with the enchantment of that image being this like floaty, weightless experience. So we had to go back and compromise and renegotiate, and then actually not more so just like come to the solution, which is to put it down here, allow the page turn to happen, and then allow this to be a silent experience where the reader just gets to take it in.
Nice.
So that's all to say that, you know, we did collaborate. And I think that part of the thing that really worked well with us is that because we had a friendship and a respect, I think all the other like little like negotiations were all like done in goodwill and understanding that we were both trying to make the best book possible. And, you know, so it was really, I thought it was just really wonderful.
Awesome. Well, for those joining us, I mean, feel free to chime in with any questions. I don't have too many more. I know you guys we're doing okay on time, but I don't want to keep you guys too long. One of my questions is, what is something from your previous books, from doing your previous books, that you learned and brought to this experience? And what is something from this, like, what are some things that you learned from doing this new book? This is a question for both of you. It could be a technical thing. It could be, you know.
That's a great question. I love it. Catia?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Ben. Whoa. Okay. That's a great question. I think I will say, okay, I'll start with what have I learned from this book and what I can carry forward first.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I mentioned this on the talk too a little bit, is just advocating for yourself, you know, and I believe that, you know, a book is such a labor of love in some ways. It takes, as an artist, I know we have many artists joining us today that are in the picture book industry, and there's so much, it just takes so much to create a book. And, you know, and I think just feeling empowered to advocate for the right paper stock, the right colors, the right look for the cover, you know, like I think when I started in picture books, I didn't really understand that I could ask for things, you know, and I could advocate for the way that I thought might be, you know, the best, you know, solution for a design problem, because I thought I was just going in someone else's lane. But I think that as an artist, you do have design skills, and especially if you really have a really clear vision for your book, just don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. So I think that's definitely, and so that's one thing I'll carry forward in this book. Do you want to speak to that too, Matthew? That question?
Yeah, I think I don't know if this was particular to this book, but I really, really love the collaborative aspect of making picture books. And I think it's, I learned again, I guess I would say, to remain open to all of the coincidences and the things that come up as the art is introduced, to allow for those changes. Like one change we had with this story was that people cried, that it made people cry, and that there was some concern about, like, is it too sad? Um, and so we had this conversation where we sort of adjusted the text, which ended up being a really, and this was something that my editor, Melissa, was really good about, like making the suggestion, explaining it, but also leaving room for me to disagree. But like this page, this sad page that you're seeing here, the sky had sent him a gift, a friend, a small red moon, and now it was gone. It used to say, and he had ruined it. And it just felt really sad, like, and he'd ruined it. It like drove the point in to a point that maybe was too strong. And that worked well with grown-up readers, but to think about the child reading it and to soften certain things like that. And then the other page said, bad bear, bad bear. Not bad bear, he thought, bad bear. So just, I think all of the things that come up in the conversation, to remain open and to actually like remain open until the very last minute. This is something that came up with drawing on walls with that I made with Josh too. Is like up until the very last minute, stay open to any good ideas or suggestions that feel right. Yeah.
Wow.
So what I got out of that was there a test audience, some child that you made cry for that realization to come forward?
I think it was mostly grown-ups. I'm not aware of a test audience, but
There's a sad child somewhere out there that read an early version of this book.
I know that the sales team read a version and said they were concerned about the sadness. And I actually feel like we've solved it somehow, because I haven't heard that. I mean, of course, people feel things and people do cry, but in a good way. Like, and I think Catia is largely responsible for creating that lightness and the beauty, so that it doesn't feel heavy, so that you feel at the end uplifted, rather than that the sadness doesn't carry you too deep, but that you feel uplifted. And I think it's the images, like, yes, we have this maximum moment of despair, but then look what happens, and look at the values, look at the light that's entering in, and then this transcendent experience. And then this, like this redeems it, right? Good bear, kind bear, don't worry bear. So Catia and the words are both lifting us back up from that sad place.
Well, I want to thank you both. I think the book is a great pairing of text and image, and I think it's just a great book. And overall, good job, you guys.